The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. It's Caitlin Troughton here with Marie-Ève Chartrand. I'm just going to give it another minute before we get going, but so just hold on there, and then we'll get started. Can everybody hear me? You can just put your okay, great. That's good news. Thank you. Okay, so maybe I'll get started, and we're going to record this anyway. So if people come in late, they'll be able to hear the beginning if they need to hear that. First of all, welcome to everyone. I'm Caitlin Troughton. I work in marketing at Toon, and I'm here with our customer success director, Marie-Ève Chartrand, who some of you may know quite well.
Hi, everyone.
And she's going to show everyone here different ways that a rigger can apply a specific master controller that we at Toon created. Our goal is to introduce you to the master controllers in a concrete way. That's what we want to do in this webinar. And we want to show you some of the possibilities of what you could do with this master controller. The great thing about master controllers and this feature is that you can design them to be as focused or with as narrow a focus or as broad a focus in function and purpose as you want based on the requirements of the project or the studio you're working for or the projects you're working for or whatever it is that you guys decide you need from it. To script them, they do require technical skill, obviously, for scripting at that creation stage. However, once you've got that done, they can be quite easy or straightforward to use, as you'll see today. They allow you to do something different. They allow you to take the idea of something that you want to do that is defined by you and bring that into harmony so that you have that functionality or that efficiency gain or what have you. There's a lot of ways you can use them. Really, the sky's the limit. Your ideas are the limit. The methodology you use to approach them, that's what defines what you can do with them. So they're a tool that allow you to take your vision, an idea of something that you want to do in harmony, and then bring that capability into the hands of the users, the animators, the riggers, the other artists that you have working on the particular project or projects. The master controller that Marie-Ève is going to show you today is set up by a rigger and is made to help with the posing and animating rigs in different ways. Marie-Ève is going to show you some of the ways that you can apply it, and we want to note to you that it can be used with any rig. So you'll be able to take it, practice with some of the assets that we're going to provide, and think about whether or not and how you'd want to apply it to your own work. Marie-Ève will provide you with both the context and the intention of the master controller so that you can understand the thinking that went on behind its development, as well as the purpose that drives the UI design that was made for it and the function that you will use it for. Riggers, it's intended for riggers, and riggers have to have the big picture of the animation. Generally, the way we see it is that they need to know what the rig needs to be able to do for an animator and also where it should be limited. So this master controller enables them to set up a rig, which can then be posed on keyframes by an animator in a much more efficient way, thereby reducing the amount of manual posing that would need to be done at the animation stage. So as mentioned in the description, there's no scripting knowledge required for this webinar, and Marie-Ève is now going to take you through the various aspects of using it.
Thank you, Caitlin. That's such a perfect introduction to this pretty awesome tool that we're about to show. So like Caitlin's saying, you don't need any scripting knowledge to be able to use this tool or this master controller script. And everything that I'm going to use and show to you today is available right now on the Learn portal. And at the end of this webinar, I will show you exactly how to go get it. And you can start downloading these examples and be able to apply them to your own rigs.
Marie-Ève, maybe we could also just give them quick guidelines on how to ask questions and get answers. We won't answer questions while Marie-Ève is presenting, but we will get to your questions at one point in the webinar. So in your right-hand pane, you guys have the questions area. You also have chat. I suggest you use the questions area, and when we have the right opportunity or at the end of the webinar, we'll get to your questions.
Excellent. So I will start explaining a little bit the mindset behind this example of a master controller. Like we're saying, master controllers are whatever you need them to be. So whatever the need is in your production, you can identify it and then create a script using master controllers that will perform that specific task that you need. So the need that we are addressing today is the ability of posing characters very quickly in production during your cutout animation process. One of the example that I'm going to use is what we call a 360 rig. So it works really well on 360 rigs, but it can be applied to any types of rigs that you have. So a 5-view standard production rig, you can use that as well on it. And so the mindset that has been used for this master controller is a grid methodology, so that it's easier to understand when you do the setup on how you input the poses into this master controller. We're using a spatial grid where you have different poses that may be in different areas in your grid. And so that's kind of the idea behind it. And I will show you 3 examples using this concept. So the first one we're going to talk about, I'm going to disable the grid here, is an arm. The idea behind this one is that it's making an actual concrete use of the spatial grid. So you see you have 4 poses of that wrist that is at 4 different locations in the grid. And we're going to be able, later on, I'm going to show you how it's done exactly, to give these poses in that script. And so that's going to be quite handy. The other idea is that sometimes you have poses that are not necessarily spread over the space. So if I turn off this arm, the other one is that you could have expressions. Well, your expressions on your character will be one on top of the other. So at this point, the grid kind of becomes more of a suggestion. You can do whatever you want with it. So here we decided to create some handles where you can move the dot of the master controller. We'll see that at a later point, where in different areas of the screen, you could reach different expression and you interpolate the different expression of your character. So what I do is actually, again, turning off this one, if I bring this one in, I would create 4 key poses that are these 4 expressions, and later on, the master controller will allow me to interpolate any pose in between these ones and use that as my animation key pose. And then the place where the grid takes all its sense or becomes even more useful is when you have a lot of poses. For example, I showed you 2 examples of 2x2 grids with 4 poses. But when you start doing head rotations on 360 rigs or a full body rotation, or here we have a 180-degree head rotation, you have some tilts up, some tilts down, and you even have the flip side of these elements. So at that point, when you have, in this case here, you have 18 poses, it becomes a bit harder to keep track of all the poses you have to input it in. So when you have a grid that helps you position your rotations and your tilts, it makes a lot of sense. And so those are the various examples I will show you with the script that we have created.
And I think I just would add something that you said to me before, that this is more intuitive on the animator side because it's spatially positioned for an animator to then go in and have to find particular poses. Once they understand the methodology behind it, it's much easier for them to just use their pointer to get to where they want to go, whether it's an expression or it's a head tilt or a turning or what have you.
Yes, definitely. So we could do if we do a comparison with the pose copier, which is a feature that's already in Harmony 15, the pose copier allows you to, from a template, to select specific poses and quickly paste it on your characters, which is very handy. But here, the extra addition is that you don't need to go search for a template or get a specific pose. It could be, you could use as your key when you pose your animation any frame that is interpolated between any of these poses. So you don't have to choose specifically from these ones. It can be anything in between. And for that to make sense, I will now show you an example and how I would apply the script on an existing rig. So you don't have to modify any of the rigs that you have created so far. You will just have to drop this script in your scene and simply add it on. And you'll see it's really not long to set up. So I'll just take out these nodes from here, and I will go in my undone examples. So the first one we have is a, sorry, I'll just go get the, open the scene straight up. So in my undone examples, I will open the first one is the arm. So we'll open an arm scene. So in this one, we simplified it. We don't have a full character just so that we can focus on what we are doing. I have an arm in 3 parts, and I have set in that scene setup the 4 different poses. So we have 4 key poses, and I will then apply the master controller script that we are demonstrating this time on this template. So there's different ways you can do that, and so what you can do is from the templates that we have provided you on the Learn portal, you will find in it the interpolation grid script. So we made it very simple. It's a quick template that you can drop in your scene. And so it will simply add a node, but it drags in the scripts for you. And so once that's done, it's very simple. Save your project. And what we're going to do is you will want to see the script that have been imported in your project. But since they have just been imported right now, what we want to do is Harmony needs to refresh in order to read these scripts here. So the quick way to do this is to go in File, Open Recent, and then you just reload your project. So within a second, you will have access to all the projects, the script that are inside the project scope. And so the only thing you will need to do here to be ready to set up your project is to choose your Show UI script that will actually launch the interface for this master controller. So if I run the script, I choose Show UI, and then you have access to the new script that we are working with. And so you have the choice of working with presets or entering a size of grid that you want to do. Right now, we have choose a preset of 2 by 2. Once my preset is in or I've entered numbers, then I have the ability to modify anything in here. And so, like we were saying before, I have these 4 poses, and so that it's very easy to understand, they are also working in an ellipse or a square like this. So very simple. I can click on my anchor point like this and say my first pose will be frame 1. And I could even change that label here and go to, well, maybe this is my bottom right. And I can go carry on like this. You have the choice of either clicking on this point and entering the frames that you want. So here, frame 10. And again, I could go with bottom left. So these labels, they are for you to decide what you would like them to be named. You can leave the default value or enter something that is more descriptive to the project that you're working on. It could be the name of the pose. And then you could also just go straight to your keyframe here. And when I click on the next anchor point, you'll see that it already takes in the number, and I can press OK. And so I have my anchor 1, 2, 3. Now I'll go to my last one. And then on the last one, frame 30. And then I have, as soon as I click on these different ones, you'll see that it has updated and remembers which poses are assigned to which anchor point in this grid. And so the other thing you can do is as you play with your master controller that we'll see later on where you have your control point to move this arm around, you can position it wherever you want on this arm. And that's why I like to put a grid as a reference in the back, because it gives me exactly the coordinates where the pieces are found. So if I was to go back to my first frame, I can see that my wrist is located at 0, -1. So a little recap of 4th grade mathematics, how to play with coordinates. So I will go with this one and say, okay, the first pose is 0, -1. And you'll see that it will reposition the grid as you go on. So even if you have presets, you still have full freedom to modify your grid. And so in this one, we have -5, -1. And on this one, we can go with 5, -5. Yes. And then 5. And the last one, and see, you can see here, you can zoom in and you can pan around in the grid as well. So on the last one, we have 0 and 5. Hey, I made a square. Yes. So now my grid is set. If you like it and something that you would reuse, or if you think that you may come back and redo this grid later on, you can save this grid as a preset. So I'll go and name this my 2x2 arm preset. And then you'll have access to this later on when you get back in this interface. So just for example, if I show you how that works, so I will close this interface. And so even if I did not set anything, first thing I'll do is select the arm group, whatever I want to affect, and then go back to my script editor. And if I relaunch my script here, now you see in my preset dropdown, I have access to my different settings, including my 2x2 arm presets. So you can start building more and more grids even within this script. And I do done, and I have access to what I had created before.
Do you have time for a question?
Yes, let's have a question.
Okay, so one of them I can answer. Jason Lynn was asking if we'll have a webinar on the scripting side. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to send you guys a survey. And one of the questions we have is if you would be interested in having a webinar that would have some basic scripting in it, where you would have to have some knowledge, some basic knowledge of scripting to get the full benefit of it. You can still come without any because we're thinking of showing some pretty simple scripts. But that's one of the questions that we have for you guys. So please take the time to fill in the survey at the end. We're certainly quite open to having a survey, a webinar on basic scripting, definitely. The other question that Jason had was, which build of Harmony are we using?
So I'm currently using the official release of Harmony 15.
The reason he's asking that is because he doesn't see the scope options in the script editor. And I think that's because, Mary-Eve, you need to let him know, like, what are we looking at here? This script editor that we're looking at is actually the UI that was designed. No.
Okay,
sorry.
no. Sorry. What we're referring to here is this option in the menu. So what I'll do is I'll close this option, and the build I have in Harmony Premium, I am using the build 13055. So 15.00.13.055, you should have access to this version. So if you don't see the scope menu, it's possible that you would be on a previous version of Harmony. And we can look into this after the webinar, Jason, if you need to. And because yes, so that without this, it makes it a bit more difficult to know which script you have within your project.
Okay, and the last couple of questions.
Yes.
So the language that we're using is
JavaScript.
Yep, JavaScript.
As well as it's JavaScript, but it's also using our Harmony scripting API. In the to have a bit more information on the language we're using, and also what the scripting resources that you can find to be able to use Harmony, to script with Harmony. There's a little course on the Learn portal as well, being able to guide you step by step into creating your first scripts. And so we'll be able to show you that as well at the end of this webinar.
Great. And then they're asking about the rigs, but we'll talk about what rigs will be made available at the end of the
Yes, absolutely.
webinar. Okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's it for now.
Perfect. Okay, so the next step in using this script here. So the first step you do is you select which group you want to affect with this master controller script. Then you set up your grid. And the third step is after you're done setting up your different points in your anchors, or your anchor points in your grid, you will see that the monitored attribute section becomes available. Actually, specifically the filter attributes button becomes available, where when you have everything selected, it will show you all the different attributes that are selected. But based on your animation, not every function or deformer points or parameters in the pegs are animated. So what you can do to make your master controller lighter, optimize this process, is filter the attributes so that it will only affect the ones that were actually animated. And now you can see it's mainly only working on some position and the rotation. So that's good, makes it a lot lighter. So the node count is much lighter and the attribute count is also much lighter. And the last step is you will select your composite node where you want the master controller node that will be created to be connected to. So you select this composite node and then you can name it. I will name it arm wave. And you can see that now it will create a state file where it will record the positions of these, the values of these positions, and then the master controller name of the node that will be created. And then you can click create. So that's done. And then you can close this window. And what's happening now is that it actually created the master controller node for you. So that's the only thing you have to do to use this script. And then if I was to show you this, I'm just going to add a keyframe. And when I test my master controller, I make sure to be away from my main poses so I don't start messing around with them. So I just go to a pose later on, select my new master controller node, and show the controls. So as soon as I show the controls, I will turn off the grid just for a better visual result. So I'll move that point, it will snap to its original location, and you will see now that I am able to move the arm, a little bit like inverse kinematic if you want, but based on the poses that I gave it. And the more poses I put in my grid, the smoother this motion will be. Yes.
And it's also limited to the area that you chose, is it not?
Yes, that's it. So it is only limited to the areas that I choose. So I could still animate the head with a different master controller, animate this arm with this master controller. You could have many different master controllers here that would work on different pieces of the character. For example, changes the eye size, animate the arm, rotate the head, and so on. So you can have different aspects of control. And so that's for a master controller in on a spatial grid where you would have your wrist or your arm move around. Now we'll show you that on the expression. So I'll close this one and go back to my expressions. And again, all these scenes that I'm showing you right now with the beavers, all these assets are fully available to you, and we'll show that to you again where they're found. So in this one, see a very similar setup. The difference, or the concept that is different here, I'm going to turn it off temporarily, is that instead of having my poses being spread apart in space, is that they are just simply one on top of the other. And we have the different expressions here for my character. So when you have your scene set up, or your rigging setup scene there, you would have all these various poses that you want to be able to input into this master controller. So all your head tilt, head rotation, different expressions, body turns. So you can have all these different poses set up in your rigging scene. So we have these poses like this, and since they're one on top of the other, we went ahead and created a handle. They are like a visual reference where the animator would know that if I slide my cursor towards this point, it's going to become surprised. Up there, it's going to become happy, perplexed, and that. This could be anything you want. So it's really up to your imagination and the needs of your production to use this tool and make whatever you want with it. The idea is to make it as simple as possible for the animators. So once the rigging artist sets it up, understands what are the needs of the production and the animation, what that rig has to do, then you can create all these different elements there. And a little trick, in case you don't know about this, we have in the node view a visibility node, which allows me, if I go into my render view, you see I don't, my handle or my reference is not there because this visibility node is set up to only display in OpenGL. So it will not render or not be visible in soft render. So I like to have these different references or points that I turned off in render view with the visibility node. So that's just a little tip on the side that you can use for anything in your rigs. So now, if I bring back again my scripts, and now I will show you a different way. Instead of using the node from the library to do this, the other way you can do, I'm just going to save this. I'm going to close my scene and show you the other thing you can do is we have provided you in this folder that you will be able to download from the Learn portal. There's a script folder here. So if you grab this script folder, you can copy this and simply put it in the root project. So I am working on my expression on done. You simply have to paste the scripts in here. So pasting the scripts in here or using that template that you drag into your node does exactly the same thing. It's just some people don't like to play in these different folders. So you have the option of using that template or just simply copy and pasting the scripts in your projects. And once you launch it, once again, you will be able to go in your library, your script editor, and within the scope, if you go in projects, you will see all the scripts that you just pasted in your root project. So remember, it has to be at the root of that project. And all the steps I am explaining to you right now, where to go, how to copy that, it's also all fully documented in the Learn portal. We have all the steps with pictures and so on so that you don't have to try to remember everything that I'm telling you right now. So once that's done, once again, you launch the interface. Oh, before launching the interface, make sure that you select the node that you want to affect, and then you launch the script. And then show UI, and I have one more time, I have my UI here. And then I can again choose a 2x2. You could have a grid of any size. Here I only have 4 expressions, so I'll go with a 2x2, but it could be again anything you want. And this is where it becomes a little different because it's not really in the space. They're one on top of the other, but what we'll use to be in the space is just where we're going to move that point towards that grid. So what we're going to do is, okay, I'm going to go with, this is my happy pose. So I can make that frame 1 will be my happy pose. So you can see here the labels are quite handy to understand what the different things we're doing. Going to frame 10, where it's a little perplex. So frame 10, and then can set my label. Does that have an E? Sorry. Yeah, no E. Okay, cool. And then frame 20, he's surprised. So that's this one here. Frame 20. I clicked on cancel. Okay, here, surprised. And then on B, it's going to be frame 30. He's going to be angry. And so that's very handy. And the last step I will need to do here to be done setting up my grid is that I'd like to set my points to be closer to these labels so that the animator really knows very quickly where to go to find the different expressions with this master controller. So I'll bring it back, my grid, and this is where I'll say, okay, I'd like to have it at maybe around 7, 9 to, or -7, should I say. -7, 9. I have my first element there. Perplex will be at, well, the opposite. That's fairly easy. 7, 9. And then again, remember that depending on the size of your grid, you will be able to zoom out and pan. And then our surprise is at, will be at -7, -9. And the last one will be at, let's see if I remember this one, 7, -9. There you go. So now my grid is set up. and my point will be able to go close to these elements. And actually, this one is one of my favorite. One more time, filter the attributes so that it really only affects the elements that are animated in these expressions. And the last step, name my master controller. So it's going to be expression. It will automatically add an MC underscore, and I will create this. And then it will tell me that I did not select the composite node. So select the composite node, and then we're going to create again, and then my master controller is set up. So as you can see, it is really quick to set up. It really is just inputting different poses. I'll turn off the grid so that we can see that a bit better. And again, I will go away from my poses because sometimes you may be on frame 1, you start testing a master controller and you're removing your pose on frame 1. So that only applies obviously to your rigging setup scene. When you do cutout animation, that will not be necessarily the same case. So creating keyframe here, and then I will start this master controller. So to see your controls, select your master controller, and you go to show control. If ever you were to look in the menu, it's view, show, control, and then the point appears. The more poses that you have loaded, or like let's say you imported 75 different poses or angles in your master controller, it will take a bit more time to load the control. It just needs to load the states in that button for the first time. Afterward, it will go and it will animate the different poses. But it's normal if it takes a little bit of time to display if you have many poses. And so this is fun. I like this one because then I can start finding any interpolation I want in between, from angry to surprised to perplexed. So I can easily pose my character. So on this one, I'll say he's like somewhat happy, surprised, and perplexed, somewhere in between. And then I'll create another keyframe where it's going to be completely angry. Go to angry. There you go. And then it just simply interpolates between these poses. So
Minnie had a question. There's a couple questions I wouldn't mind asking at this point, and it's a good question. I think I asked it of you yesterday. Can you animate on top of the master controller?
So that's a fairly involved question. It's a very good question. So how it works, you can absolutely, the first thing you have to do is you use your master controller and you go ahead and pose your character. Afterwards, like, well, actually in this one, I'd like to have maybe the mustache really down because he got even more angry. So you can go ahead and do all the little tweaks. The part that is important to understand, and it's especially when we use the interface and we do filter attributes, we only keep the different elements that were animated in these different poses that we sent into the master controller. So that is not a problem. Let's see, we'll interpolate. If I do manual fixes afterwards, the one thing you have to keep in mind is that if in this master controller I touch it again on this keyframe, it will bring back my angry pose with the original position of my whiskers. So as soon as I touch it, it brings back the pose that I'm asking for. But if I'm correct, and I will attempt this one, on this same pose, if I grab the eyes and I make them bigger, and I could have a slider for this, maybe it gets really mad, I could make them really big or really tiny. They might be animated, I'm unsure. No, they were animated. But if you were to touch pieces that are not animated, then they would probably remain. But it will all depend on your expressions. But you can easily go on any keyframe and adjust, make any tweaks you want after you've used your master controller. I
think the way, the short answer is yes, but you have to follow the right methodology, right?
Yes,
you have
correct.
to go to your keyframe, you set it up with the master controller, then you finalize your pose manually, which is why we were saying at the beginning, first, it reduces the number of manual steps you actually have to do, because part of the pose, if you need something more complex, part of the pose can be done with a simple execution of this master controller, and then you can manually set extra parts to the pose, and then you set your keyframe, and then you can do your interpolation between keyframes before you touch anything, or you go to a new keyframe and then you move your master controller. So the point is, You have to make sure that you follow the right methodology and do things in the right order. And then, yes, you can animate on top of the master controller.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's other question that, and if you have questions about that when you're trying it out, like when we hope you'll go to the Learn portal, download all of the assets that we're going to share with you, follow the instructions. If you have questions, really feel free to send us an email and let us know any of your questions that you have with this. The other question that came up was that Anda Chitescu, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name properly. I asked the question that they noticed that we have tweens between our key poses, and is that necessary to set up? I don't think we had tweens between the key poses.
Yes, we're talking about this here. No, it is not necessary. It's really just recording the actual pose or the values at this current keyframe. The reason why we have interpolation between the keyframes is that it allows us to see how well it animates between the poses in the setup. But you don't have to keep that, and you don't need them to be able to use that script, which is actually an excellent observation and question. Yeah, I'm always having a lot of fun with this character.
I think that's it for now.
Okay, very good. So I'll move on now to the head rotation. Obviously, this one has more steps in it, so I will, for interest of time and not having you look at me click for 18 different anchor points, I will do a portion of it focusing on some important elements, and then I'll show you the final example. So same thing, I will bring in, I will simply copy my scripts in this one. So copy my script folder into the root of my other project. Again, you have the choice of using that template or copying the scripts. We launch Harmony. And then let's see what we have there. So in this scene, we have the character that has several head rotation. And we did a 180 here. We didn't do a full 360, but you could absolutely do a full 360. That is not a problem. The particularity of this rig and the way a lot of people work when they are building 360 rigs is that they will pose the first side of it. So the first either 180 degree or the first 90, where the head will rotate all the way to the front, and then it will flip. So the idea here is that between these two poses where you have the one side, and you can see the subtle differences where the character is flipping, and I'll zoom on it so that you can see better. So we have that little flip, and from this point forward, we have not reposed the entire character, which is because it would be fairly long and tedious to repose poses that you've done. So most people will go ahead and create the first side, then flip on the top peg or on a master peg and have the other side of the head done. So this script takes this into account because when you have your flip, you don't want to have your interpolation where the head will flip necessarily. Obviously, when you pose your character for animation, as an animator, you have to always pay attention to flips. Most animators know how to deal with flips, but this script deals with that in particular. The other thing that we have done here, besides setting up a grid to be able to set the coordinates a bit better, is that we have marked the different keyframes with timeline markers. For those who don't know how to use timeline marker, you can set your cursor anywhere, and you could do one frame, or you could do a multiple selection of frames and set up a marker. So if I right click here, I can do scene marker, and I can do mark current frame, and I can set up a color, mark and mark a comment in it if I want to. So that's what I did to identify very quickly these frames, so that when it's time to populate my grid of 18 frames, I know what frames to go to quicker, since I have already so many keyframes in between these poses. So then I do the same process every time, going into my scope project, going into show UI, launch the show UI script, and then I have access to my interface. And don't forget, before doing so, and sometimes I tend to forget to do that, before you do that, you will want to make sure that you select the right group. Now going back, and we'll relaunch that. Show UI, perfect. Okay, so now this is where the presets are interesting, because these, you could do it on your own, but you will see that we have some mirror preset. I have a turnaround 6x3, which is perfect for this character because I do have 3 poses on one side, 3 poses on the other side with down, middle, and up tilts. So I'll use this grid, and the particularity of this grid here is if I zoom in, you'll see that I actually have 2 points that are overlapping each other. And that's the reason for this, is that my head doesn't flip in between 2 poses. So you will want to set up your left flip and your right flip on these 2 poses in the middle. So that will make it a lot easier to handle if you're dealing with rigs that have been flipped over with a master peg. And so I will not go ahead and set up this entire grid. Like I was saying, you would be looking at me clicking and setting points for a little while. It takes about, for a rig like this, it takes about 10 minutes to do, so it's not long, but in the interest of time, I won't annoy you with that. I will open the completed scene. So if I now go in the done example, I have my head that is completely done. And so in this one, if I go in my node view, you'll see now that I have my master controller node. I will disable the grid so that you can see better. And then on this one, I'm going to, again, display the show controls. You can see I have more poses, so it took a little, like a second more to load. And now, that's a nice part of it, is that I'm able to rotate the head around. And now that's the nice thing. As I am on the first frame, so I'm messing up my first pose. I will undo that. I'm going to go to the end of my scene, give myself a bit of space, set up a keyframe here. Maybe on this one, set a keyframe, and then I'll start playing with the head on this frame. So now I can go anywhere and start playing with this rotation. And so you'll see that as you rotate, you may have sometimes, the eyebrow will pop out and all that at different times. So you may want to add extra poses. Instead of having 18 poses, you may want to add 24 poses so that you have more control. So here I went with the minimum poses, but you can see it works quite well. So like we were talking about, the pose copier allows you to do something similar, but you would have to choose a specific angle or a tilt. Here, you can pose it at any little frame increments you want in between. So that can be very quick to do a head turn. And now that's where you have to be careful as an animator. If you go from one side and you flip to the other side, let's say I'm going to pose in here, I have a head flip. I'll make sure I have a keyframe everywhere. I'm going to collapse my peg, do that right. So create a keyframe, and then I have my interpolation going on here. You'll have a head flip, and that's normal because you have the in between or the interpolation of one side that has been flipped. So what you have not to forget to do is with your master controller, you'll have to go find that middle pose before it flipped, and then you will want to set just a frame after your keyframe where the head is flipped on the other side. So then you have your perfect interpolation. Obviously, I didn't pose it right exactly, but you have to not forget to pose your character. Maybe I'm going to move him up a little bit on this side and just make that better. But you can see how fast it is to change the angle of the head and correct your animation using this. So now that's good. Now I have my flip going on. I don't have the head flipping. So make sure you have your keyframe side by sides. And that's the same. It's not a master controller particularity. It is just a cutout animation posing particularity. So that's something you do even when you do your manual posing. And then you have your head rotation, the squishy head. So those are 3 examples of what you can do with this type of master controller. So obviously this is 1 in a trillion. You can do so many things with it. you could have sliders and dots in your camera view that would allow you to change the position of your nodes in your node view. Anything that is scriptable in Harmony is available. You can change with these sliders and widgets in the camera view. So it's anything. So here we're showing you an application of doing it on a rig. It can be on anything that you would need for your production.
The feature, yes. Yes.
Yes.
It's really flexible, and as we said at the beginning, it's as the limit is your application within the ability to script within Harmony. How about we answer a few more questions, if that's okay?
Yes,
okay,
and then I'll show where you can find all these assets.
Yeah, okay. So for people that feel they missed out a lot, don't worry, we're recording it, so we will make it available a day or two after the webinar. And so you'll be able to watch it from the beginning, and you can email us anytime with any questions you might have. Okay, let me go back because I want to make sure about all the questions getting answered. So one of the Mini Cho, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was wondering if there was a possibility of getting access to the 360 Beaver rig. I think we're going to include pieces of the rig, and we can think about that as for a future.
Yes, right now also on the Learn portal, you have access not to a beaver, but another type of animal. You have access to a 360 links as well, where it's a full 360 with lip syncs and head positions as well. You have access to that in the Rigging 3 courses. You also have access to it in the Master Controller course. So all of that, you have these assets available there. So it's also a 360 that's built on a very similar frame, pretty much the same frame as the Beaver. But in this one, you will have access to this one here.
Yeah, which is what kind of rig is it?
Well, this one is mainly, it would be, the head is it's a 180 with a flip.
Flip, so like
yeah, so it's a frontal 180.
Yep, okay. So there are two questions from Fernando Gutierrez. I'm sorry. So the first one is, it's really simple to this use of the master controller, but how about the interpolation in the animation? Do you have to do precise animation between frame 1 and frame 10, or is this a Toon Boom interpolation?
Oh, it's just a standard interpolation. Whichever frame you select to whichever frame, it has. It's not bound to any frame number. It's not bound to any duration, and there's nothing specific you have to do. The concept is that you could go ahead and move these pieces manually yourself and go up your hierarchy and on any frame you want and control different pieces. It is the same thing when you use the master controller. It just does all these manual operation for you. And so it is just setting up a pose so that you do it with the master controller, or you do it manually with the transform tool or any other tools that you have in there. It amounts to the same. So it can be on any frame. It can be with interpolation, without interpolation, as you wish.
Okay, so the second question from Fernando was that once you have your master controller rig done, once it's set up in the rigging phase, do you always have to maintain the keyframes, as in that you can't delete the keyframes? Is that true? And if it is, does that mean that you have to start your animation after the setup keyframes are taken?
Okay, so let me be more clear on that. So in your rigging scene, normally in your rigging setup scene, you will keep many poses exposed for different purpose in the production. It doesn't have to be related to the master controller. But the reality is, once these poses are stored in the master controller node in what we call the state file, which we saw quickly earlier in the interface, these poses are recorded there. So even if your original scene, you would delete all these poses and keyframes, you would still have them in your template with that master controller. But don't delete that template, though. These poses have to be recorded somewhere. So they are in that master controller state file there. So you're not forced to keep it there. Now, an animator, what they would do is that they would open their scene with no poses at all, and they will import that template in their scene, which would have that state file with the recording of all the poses. So even if they have no poses, just a character standing there, then they can start posing with the master controller without having any of the poses in the scene.
That's because they're at different phases of the production, right? One you're doing while you're doing the rigging, and then you move into the animation phase. It's a fresh start for the animator. They have their setup and they just go.
Correct. So what I did today was more from the point of view of the rigging artist, setting it up and testing it in their scene. But once they put it in the library, then they simply have to the animator simply has to import it, and they can go ahead and start animating with all the poses that are in it. Which reminds me, when you want to set up a template, there's a little operation you have to do, and again, it is documented on the Learn portal. Before you create your template with your character and your master controller, you want to make sure that when you copy it, the scripts that are inside that scene follow the template. And to do this, you will go in your master controller head rotation and go in the this interface here of the master controller, the layer properties, and you have a tab called extra files, and it's super easy. You go in extra files, you click on the function button. Sometimes you may have to click it twice to create the function first, then the window will open at a second click, and you simply write the name of the folder in your root project containing the scripts. The default is often script, but if you named your folder something else, you just have to put the right name here. Once that's done, you just write scripts here, close that, save that. You are ready to create a template. Like I was saying, that is documented on the Learn portal, so you don't have to remember that on top of your head.
Okay, so then another question from Minnie. Can you add another pose to the master controller after you set it up?
So you can add more poses. What you would have to do is actually you have to go through that setup again. So if you saved your grid as a preset, that will be good, but okay. I'm just checking with our developer here just to make sure that I'm giving you the right answers. So let's say you have done all your setup for your grid and you want to add additional poses for your grid. You have to redo the setup.
For now, it's not supported by the UIs, but the file for the presets, you can find them in the folder of the scripts. And those files, they are pretty readable, and there's an array of points with the labels, and you can add additional points there if you want to just add something. But unfortunately, there's no way to do it from the UI. You really have to open your preset file and add it manually. But It's doable.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that's it. So that's obviously the first version of this script. It has a lot of awesome features. At this point, you cannot add points to a grid afterwards. So you would have to either you go back in and you redo the setup, or if you understand a bit how the files work, arrays work, and all that, you could open the different files, the states files, and all that, and manually add points and poses. But that obviously you would have to be a bit more familiar with text-based files and all that. So maybe in a next iteration of this script. Before we run out of time, I would like to show everyone where you can find these assets on the Learn portal. So if you are not familiar with the Learn portal, I wish everyone becomes familiar with the Learn portal. We have a lot of free learning material there, a lot of video tutorials. You can win badges and points and get a lot of content. So here on learn.toonboom.com, where you will go to find these assets, you will simply search for master controllers sample or script, or if you search for master controller, you will find it, but master controller sample will take you there a lot faster. You will find a module called master controller script samples. And so in this, you will find all the information that we covered today and even more. So we're going to talk about the introduction of everything we talked about, and then all the concept of grids and so on. So everything we talked about is described here: how to copy the scripts in your scene, how to use the interpolation grid and do your setup. So all that information is there. and then how you will create your template. So going to extra files, writing the word script in it, and then the actual documentation of all the features in the grid. And most of all, right here within all the topics, you'll see download material. So you will be able to download all the assets that I showed you today. I was using this exact folder. And then the other thing is that if you are interested in knowing a bit more about scripting understanding for the people who are asking the language that is, you go in JavaScript, we have a course called Harmony Scripting. So you could just simply search Harmony Scripting. It will take you to this course, just introduction to scripting, the whole concept behind master controllers, and the samples of the script are in this course here. So you will be able to find all that information here.
Okay, so we'll just try to answer a few more questions.
Yes, absolutely. We have about a few more minutes to go.
Yeah. Okay, so then what happens if you need to do lip syncing in a specific pose, i.e. mouth or drawing swaps? Will each mouth need to be custom made for each of the expressions? I think the short answer
is yes. The more you push it, or depending what you affect, you could have different master controllers for lip syncs. You could have, like if you start playing with it, you could have sliders that would play, you could change lip sync with, you could have, so there's many different things you can do. Actually, if you look at, if I'm correct, the links on the Learn portal has a slider for the lip sync and a different master controller for the head rotation. So you can start playing with combination, but you will have to build on that as you get more familiar with master controllers.
Yeah, I think another thing is to remember that there's a methodology for this master controller and a reason that this master controller was made. And so that's what we meant at the very beginning, where when you want a master controller to do something, you have to think about what you want it to do and how you want it to work. So that's something that you develop the vision for the capability, and you develop a master controller for that. And then you can find ways in which we combine the tasks you need to do using master controllers, using the artist's work themselves, etc. Okay. The next one is like, they're wondering how with this master controller, how it behaves with envelope deformers. Is there a way to go back and fix things that the controller might not pose correctly? And would that best be suited for manual fixes in the end? And I think that you've kind of answered your own question there, that there's a bit of manual work that sometimes you will need to do, and you will want the animator to do, because they are the one that really sees those finessing aspects of this.
So that master controller works really well with envelope deformers. The head of the beaver, the rotation of the head of the beaver was pretty much only done with envelope deformers. And yes, you can do additional manual fixes, but you can see that it was already working quite well right off the bat. So it will work quite well.
Great. I think we already answered this one. So for every scene using master controller, does your hero animation need to start downstream from the pose setups? The answer is no, because you're going to be in a different phase of the animation when you get to that stage of doing the actual animating. Okay, so then I'm just trying to get to the next one. How can we combine a head turn and the expressions change? So I think that is.
This has to do with the methodology, and regarding this, yes, it has to be done differently. Maybe this one is more complex, but we did it for the beaver. There's a way to do it, but we do not cover that part in this webinar because it's a bit more complex.
Yeah, and maybe you could play with it a bit and see if you can, how you position, pose, change expressions, and see what happens. And because they're, again, the master controller is designed for certain things. Let me see. Can you have an odd number of poses, or does it have to match the grid?
Actually, the grid is, you decide how many poses you have in your grid. So it could be you could you can kind of have your way around it and cheat it. You could have an odd number of poses, and you decide the size of the grid as well.
So I'm actually going to say thank you to you guys, just in case we get cut off. I'm hoping not. I think we're going to be okay. We're fine. We're going to keep going. We have a few more minutes. We're at the top of the hour, so I know some of you may need to go, but we'll take a few more minutes to answer your questions. So I think somebody asked if this setup was possible in Essentials since there is no node view. The answer, I would say, is probably not. If you don't have the functionality in Essentials to do certain things that
Yes.
require the node view,
The master controller node is not included in Harmony Essentials.
right. It's a premium feature. I think, of course, when you open a project that you've worked on in premium, it will work as is in
Mhm.
Essentials,
Yeah.
but you're not going to have access to the controls the way you would in Harmony Premium. And then there was a question about how to bake, if there was a way to bake in the keys after using the master controller, which I think relates to setups.
This is the TV state file that is generated at the end. So this is pretty much the baked states that from then you can get rid of all the keyframes of your original scene because it's ending up baked in the TV state file that you can see in one of the fields in the panel of the interpolation grid.
Yeah, so Mary, I've kind of showed you that and explained that a little bit earlier. There was a question about how many master controllers can be used in one scene.
You can have as many master controllers as you want. You may want to make sure that they don't necessarily override or conflict with one another on what they do, but again, it's not a big deal. So you can have as many of them. We have a setup of the beaver where we have like 6 of them, I think. Yeah, the eyes and the waves and the head turns and the mouth opening. You can have as many as you want.
I think the point is that the rigger, again, is the person who's going to be seeing the vision for the animation. So when the person is rigging, they need to work with someone like a developer and say, these are the functionalities that I need for the project, and I need to be able to give the animator that we're working with the ability to do A, B, C, and D, and then they work together to design the appropriate capabilities using the master controller feature, so that then the rigger can set it up with that vision in mind with the idea for the project, and then the animator can execute and use those tools and be able to create the animation that they're trying to get to, or whatever it is. Like we said, it doesn't necessarily have to be posing and animating. So I think, let me see, in the preview footage, we saw a controller with a head turn plus an expression lever. I think Mary have mentioned that earlier to you, how we had 5 or 6 different master controllers. So is every head turn point registered twice to be compatible with the multiple expressions?
So in that scene that you're referring to, we do have poses where we have the angry expression and the happy expression head turns. There could be many different ways of doing it, but with the concept of grid and poses, we did have 2 sets of poses, which sometimes is kind of simpler to understand, but you could have different sliders controlling different portion of the face, but that would be a bit more advanced.
Okay, so and then I think, again, a similar question about how do you combine things, but I think we've addressed that. So I think we've got, one last question. Can we interpolate between different camera views imported from 3D programs and incorporate master controllers to control the views in place of poses? So maybe not this master controller.
If the view is defined by a node, and it ends up being a position in the node, because I'm not really sure what the camera view is, but if that is the case, then yes, it should be possible.
With this master controller.
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of a different terminology, but we're talking about different camera views or different camera positions, absolutely.
Yep, okay. So I think we've addressed all your questions, and thank you so much. Please do fill out that survey when we end the webinar so that we can have your feedback and see what we could possibly do next. Thank you very much. See you next time.